Start recording. All right, so we have coming up next grants for your institution, where to find them and how to get them. And our presenter is Ron Davidson, who is the Special Collections Librarian at Sandusky Libraries. And I will let Ron do the rest of his introduction and that sort of thing. So take it away.
All right, thanks. Good morning. We're still morning. Good morning, everybody. Of course, my name is Ron Davidson. I've worked for the Sandusky Library for about 21 years. So we've written some grants, we've received some grants, but mainly, I guess my credentials are, I was on the ORAB board, Ohio Historical Records Advisory Board, for the past 9 years. My term just ended last month. And for 8 years of those 9 years, I was on the re-grants committee, as we call it. Excuse me. I hope I don't. I tend to get hoarse. So I have to stop once in a while to clear my throat. I was on the re-grants committee where we reviewed grant applications and we were able to give away some nice money. So I'm going to start with my presentation is kind of a two-pronged presentation. In the first section, I'm going to kind of rush through, but feel free if you have questions to interrupt and ask at any time. Let me start my presentation here. Oops. Okay, let me get it. Come on, there we go. So the first part of the presentation is where to find them. There are so many grants available, so many places to find them. This is only going to touch on a few. And again, I'm going to rush through them. You can find these just as easily yourself, and I'll show you a good source. You probably already know about them. There are many, many grants available, nationally, locally, statewide. Here's a few of the national grants, grant sources that you might want to look at. The NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities, has some really good grants. Just because it says humanities doesn't mean it's going to be a narrow focus. Just about any of your historical museums and historical organizations would be good. One really good one that they offer is called a Preservation Assistance Grant of up to $10,000. They will pay for many different types of things related to preservation. They'll offer supplies, consulting, help, many things like that. Sandusky Library has received these grants a couple of times. Our museum curator applied for one in 2000. We received some digital data loggers, and we also got one in 2007 for acquiring map cabinets and other preservation related supplies. Lots of sources available from them. IMLS has another couple of other relevant grant sources. A really good one is the Collections Assessment for Preservation. It's a CAP program. We use you hire a consultant to review your institution for preservation purposes, for suggestions on how to best preserve your collections. We had a report published in 1996 that we this CAP report is very good as a resource for applying for other grants. We use this CAP report from 1996 as support in our application for NEH in 2007. They have several other grants called the Community Catalyst Initiative for museum and community collaboration. They have Inspire grants for small museums that can give you between $5,000 and $50,000. They have a museum assessment program. The Costume Society of America, I didn't know about. They have a small museum collection care grant for $1,500. We've had a couple of recent winners in Ohio, the Historical Society of Mount Pleasant in 2019 and the Ted Lewis Museum in 2015. For the Ted Lewis Museum specifically, they had costumes of a tap dancer that was in the Ted Lewis Orchestra. Save America's Treasures is more for historical sites, historical properties, and it's primarily for government-related organizations, Native American religious educational institutions. If you have some property and need some assistance for your property, they would be a good one. The big one in my field is the NHPRC, National Historical Publications and Records Commission, which is a division of the National Archives. They have archives collaborative grants for 3 or more institutions working together. Collaboratives are becoming very popular in the grants world. Many people, many institutions, granting institutions are looking very favorably at collaboratives, and the NHPRC actually has a specific program for that. Access to historical records, up to $100,000. These are big grants. Generally, rule of thumb is the bigger the institution, the bigger the granting institution, the bigger the grants are probably going to be. But there's exceptions to all that, so we'll get to that. They have public engagement with historical records programs for interacting with users. There's also many statewide sources. You might be a little more familiar with them. We have the Ohio History Fund, which is a relatively new program, and it's it's really been it's kicked ORAB behind. Our grant applications went way down when the Ohio History Fund opened up. They have a more diverse grant program. They have 3 categories for organizational development. They offer training, development, and assessments. Assessments are very important. They offer programs in collections category for exhibit development, artifact care, surveys of collections, etc. And they offer bricks and mortar, which is a really popular one for helping to maintain buildings that are on the National Register. So if you have a historic home in your museum, that's a good source for that. Excuse me again. Their applications deadline is usually around August to September. They haven't announced theirs yet this year, but it will be announced in June. The Ohio Humanities, it's just called Ohio Humanities, that's right. Is great for programming aid. You're not going to get a lot of nuts and bolts assistance from them, but if you want some grant assistance for programming, they're a great resource. The Ohio Arts Council, I'm not familiar with them personally, but they offer a lot of operating support and project support and educational support. The Ohio Preservation Council offers professional development grants, and they just announced their 2021 mini grant. I got here, I was off all week, and on Monday, they announced their 2021 mini grant. You can apply for a grant for professional development for your institution, for members in your institution. And of course, the one I'm most familiar with is the Ohio Historical Records Advisory Board, better known as ORAB. We offer a lot of opportunities strictly for archives related collections. And I'll get into more of that. That'll be my example in the second part of the presentation today. But don't forget to look for local sources. you don't always have to look for the big guys. Look for, and it doesn't have to be it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal program strictly for museums or strictly for archives or for libraries. Look for local sources, look for unusual sources, like local foundations and just wealthy benefactors that grant a lot of money to the public. We've got places like the Cleveland Foundation, Columbus Foundation, Dayton Foundation. Pretty much any major community is going to have a public service foundation like that. Even we have one here at the Erie County. We have two actually, the Erie County Community Foundation and the Mylander Foundation. As I was saying, benefactors might create their own foundations. We have one, a man named George Mylander, who created a foundation, and he's gone now, but his foundation continues on, and they provide services, provide aid for various local community services, including the library and the local museums. Look for really unusual foundations too, sources of money. There's an organization called the William Pomeroy Foundation. It's based out of central New York, western central New York, but they give to Ohio institutions under very specific conditions. So you have to make sure you meet those conditions. Here's the example that we have. They've partnered with the Ohio History Connection for historical markers. They fund the grants for historical markers. Basically, you just have to provide the location, and you have to provide the mounting of it itself. But they provide the funding for the marker and the pole itself, but you have to install it. We had one for our library, the Sandusky Library, which is a historic Carnegie library. They funded it. We had a nice ceremony, unveiling ceremony, good publicity, nice recognition, and it's there forever, more or less. So oh, yes, one more. So the great place to start looking for grant sources is at the Ohio Local History Alliance website. I stole most of this first part of the program from their website. They have a lot of good information. It summarizes very well excuse me, what sources are available, what kind of what kind of programs they fund. It's a great start to get going. But the hard part is next. Too fast. So how do you get the grant? That's the important part, the difficult part. But it's not too difficult. I don't want to shock people. If I could do it, anybody can do it. Once you have found the right grant and made sure it's right for you, made sure you're eligible to apply, then what's next? And one thing I will recommend strongly, it's mandatory for many grants, and it wouldn't hurt to have it if you don't already have it. Get what's called a DUNS number, grants.gov. DUNS stands for, I never remember what it stands for, but I could read it right off the screen, a data universal number system. Basically what it does is it puts you on a register that verifies that you're an official organization operating. It's for any kind of organization, a business, a charity, a nonprofit, a public service organization. And it gives you a unique number that you are required to present for any federal funded grant. And the trick is, it's for any grant using federal money. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's for a grant from a federal organization. There are a lot of state and local organizations that fund with pass-through grants, where the federal government gives the money and the state or local institution distributes it, which is exactly what ORAB, the Ohio Historical Records Advisory Board, does. So anybody who applies for a grant through us has to have a DUNS number and of course a tax identification number as well. So what do you do after you make sure you have all your facts and figures aligned and you're recorded and you're recognized as an official institution that eligible for receiving grants? We're going to run through a rough example with the Ohio Archives Grant Program. We call it, inside the institution, inside of ORAB, we would call it the re-grants program. So you start out with, first, make sure you find the right one, as I said before. Have a plan for the project as thoroughly as possible. And I'll get into the details of that next. These types of questions are nearly universal in grant applications. So make sure you have this all in your head before you even apply for the grant, before you even start filling out the grant. Why? Why is your project important? Why is this the right grant for it? Why should they fund you? So how to do that? Describe your institution and your collections in as much detail as you can get away with. Some grant applications limit your size of the application, so you have to be concise but detailed as well. Describe your institution and your collections or services or whatever is related to the grant. I'm going to be talking more about collections because that's where I'm most familiar with, because I'm primarily an archivist. What's in your collections? Who uses them? Like, what type of users do you have? You have scholarly researchers? Do you serve the public with programming? Whatever like that. Give examples whenever possible. We want illustrations. The grantors want illustrations to prove, to verify what's important about your collection. Details, details, details. Highlight the importance of the collections in your project. And it's a plus if you could use this grant, the program in the grant, as a foundation for future projects to advance the mission of your institution. So, another extremely important question. These are kind of tied together. Who and how? How are you going to do this project, and who is going to work on it? Don't just say staff is going to do this project. Staff is going to scan these pictures and we're going to put them online. Say, who is going to do this project? Mary Smith, who is the assistant director, who has 12 years experience in graphic design, is going to present the program. Or Joe Jones, who is our staff archivist, who has 5 years experience in digital preservation, is going to do the scanning and digitizing, et cetera, et cetera. So it's better to have names and credentials. Of course, sometimes you might be hiring an intern or a temporary part-time or temporary person. Say that as well and explain how they're going to be trained and how what their knowledgeable background will be. If you don't have experience in doing this, doing whatever you plan to do in the project, how can you convince the reviewer it's going to be done right? That's going to be very important. The grant organizations are not just going to give money away just because you say you need it. They want it to be used properly and for the best results. So if you don't think you have enough experience, don't be afraid of getting help from consultants or finding a colleague who might offer to be an assistant, an advisor for your project. This grant, the ORAB grant specifically, and many others, several others, can be used for consultant use. You will probably be better off if you don't have the experience, if you're starting from scratch, you will probably be better off looking for a consultation grant first before you start your project. Many grants you might be turned down and advised to get some consultation. Just for one example, I won't name names because I can't remember the name, but there was a small historical society who applied for an ORAB grant just a couple of years ago. Actually, no, it wasn't a historical society. It was a township government. They had trying to preserve their records. And they were a tiny township. Their staff was only part-time. Nobody had archives or library experience. They had important papers that needed to be preserved, but we didn't think they knew how to do it. So we had to tell them no in their first application, and we advised them to get assistance and some find a trained archivist to help them. And they reapplied and they got their grant. More in the how, excuse me again. We're still in how. Are you using recognized professional standards for your project? Grant agencies are not going to give money to a haphazard project that doesn't meet the standards of the organization that they are, of the profession that they are supporting. So don't just say, for example, if you're doing a preservation grant, saying that, well, we need some support for storing our materials, and we want to apply for boxes that we're getting at Staples, these shipping boxes. Well, no, those aren't good enough. Make sure you're using proper museum and archival standards for your supplies that you're requesting, for the projects that you're doing. So for example, if you are on a scanning project, don't just say, we are going to scan 100 pictures and put them online. That doesn't say much at all. The proper way you would say, well, we are scanning 100 pictures with our Epson scan printer. We will be scanning them at 300 DPI TIFFs and converting them to JPEGs to place on our website, which is going to be done by our IT person who is trained, blah, blah, blah. Basically, make sure you're telling them that it's going to be done right. That's very important. Many grant organizations are going to require matching funds for your grant. So what is your match going to be? For the ORAB grant, it's really nice and easy. If you could offer labor as your grant. And today, the volunteer rate for labor, according to the Volunteer Association, I think that's the name, I can't remember the proper name, is over $25 an hour for labor. If you're going to offer funding, like we'll buy half and you buy half, that's easy. And I mentioned this briefly earlier, sustainability, very, very important in the grant program. Will you be able to continue and advance the products of the projects of the grant after it is finished? So for example, do you have the staff to take care of things beyond the 1 year of the grant cycle, which is usually how long the grant cycle is? Excuse me. Will you continue to improve on what has been done? You have future use for the items that you acquired through the grant. For example, again, if you're going to request, what was it? I'm losing my train of thought here. So yeah, so if you were going to say we need a full scanning setup to scan our 100 pictures we have in our collection, well, it's great, but we want the grant to have use beyond the one project whenever possible. So don't now I'm going into the next section. So what? So don't over ask, don't under ask. What do you need from the grantor to get this project done? Make sure it's no more or no less than what you need. Don't be afraid to ask for everything you need if it fits into the funding parameters. But don't think it's just a wish list either. Make sure your request fits the project without going to excess. Look for the most efficient way to do it. Excuse me. Excuse me. So again, I'm focusing more on the archives aspect of it. So ask for, if you're going to ask for equipment, for example, make sure that we're not going to spend a couple $1,000s on equipment that's never going to be used again that way. So make sure the request fits the project without going to excess. But don't be afraid to go all out. For, say, for example, for a programming grant, go for the big program if it fits your needs. And so, and again, what will this grant do for its institution, for your institution as users? How does it fit the mission of your institution and the mission of the granting organization? That's going to be important. How will this make your public services better? The purpose of the grant is to make the organization that receives the grant run better. So show us how this will help your services. How will this benefit your community? How can you demonstrate and quantify these benefits? For example, for a program, you say we hope to have 100 attendees at this program that will learn more about X, Y, and Z history of our institution, and it will educate the public and add benefits to our organization. So let me run down do a quick rundown. I guess I've already gone a half hour of a sample application. Again, I'm kind of focused on archives because that's my field. This is an example of an application from the Union County Record Center and Archives, a successful grant application that we received and approved for use. Let me open it up. So most of your grants are going to, grant applications are going to look similar to this. Some organizations will provide you a template. Others will just say, write us a letter meeting these with this information. We provide a template for the basic information, but then it's free form after that. Again, they ask you your tax ID number. Everybody's going to ask your tax ID number because we have to know that to issue you the money. You're going to have a project director, which is usually the person who's actually going to do the work. You have a authorizing official, which is usually your director or president or whatever, board president or whatever the top person is on your institution. Describe the project. And nearly all applications are going to ask you to summarize your project first. So this is basically going to be your elevator speech related to the project you want to do. So it's only going to be a couple of sentences. You provide a very concise description of your project and draw attention to what you need and what it's going to do for you, why it's going to benefit you, and do it all in just a couple of sentences. And then most applications are going to have a describe your institution, and always remember, I'm stating the obvious here, but remember, describe your institution with a slant towards with a slant towards the organization you're applying to for the grant and the purpose of the grant. But don't forget your whole organization. So if you are if you're a museum, but you're asking for archives related materials, you'll describe your museum, but you're going to spend most of your time describing your archives in your description of your organization. And then these questions are going to vary. Each organization's application is going to be different, but the questions are going to be generally similar. So, for example, what is the significance of the materials involved? This is for our archives grant. They're going to also add, what is the significance of the presentation you're going to give? What is the significance of the building you want to preserve? And who is going to benefit from your project? Let's move on to another question. What are you going to do? This is where you describe your project step by step as much as possible. You can see they have describing what you have that you're going to be working on and how you're going to be working on them step by step. Who will complete the activities? Identify the staff. You notice you list his title, list his background, his training. And again, if you're using volunteers, describe them as, say, they have experience in doing these kinds of projects, or they will be supervised by someone who does. So don't be afraid of, you don't have to have a trained professional doing your work. Just make sure you know how to do it right. So identify the results. So what are you going to come out with when you're done with the project? And why is it going to benefit your institution and the users of whatever the project is going to be? How can you do it? How are you able to do it? And how will the results be sustained? for example, another good example is, say if you were getting a grant for web hosting or something like that, and the annual subscription fee is just, I'll throw a number out, say the annual subscription fee is $500, but the institution's entire budget is $800. How are you going to pay next year's fee? We're not going to pay for a subscription fee. Organizations are not going to pay for a subscription fee unless you could satisfy them that you could pay for the following years, for example. Evaluation, just about any project, you're going to have to evaluate it at the end and show how this served your needs.
Hey, Ron, real quick. We are still seeing your slide that says example Union County Record Center and Archives. Is that what you're meaning us to see at this point?
I'm sorry?
So we're still seeing your slide that says example Union County Record Center and Archives.
Oh, it didn't show?
Us to see?
Yeah, I clicked onto the actual application. Oh, well.
It's a screen sharing thing. Once you've picked instead of sharing your actual screen, you're sharing the PowerPoint. I think.
Oh, you have to switch to a different screen.
Yeah.
Hey, well,
Right.
Oh, okay, here we go. I think.
Yes, you may need to stop sharing and then start sharing again. There you go.
Oops. Well, boy, that was a waste of time now, wasn't it? I'll have to run it through again. Again, here's the, many organizations will provide a template and others will just say, write it free form, but the information is going to be this similar. Describe who's working on it. Make sure you have a good elevator speech for your project. And so basically there wasn't that much more that you'll see that I said. But if you wanted to actually read these grants, we have them on our ORAB website. So in summary, go back. Basically, a grant application is a sales pitch. Make sure you're selling your institution, selling your project, and selling your ability to do the project. And that's the summation. Do we have time left over? If you have any questions, I probably spoke too fast and too vaguely, but if you have any questions or thoughts, I'll be glad to answer them. I guess we could shut off the share.
All right, thank you. I don't think we had any questions in the chat, but if folks want to put them in now, or if would want to go ahead and unmute and ask Ron directly, I think that'll be fine. We have about 10 minutes left for that. So.
Did I make sense? I feel like I didn't make sense. But,
oh, you were fine. It's hard to encapsulate all the things you should know.
Yeah.
We have had some requests for your PowerPoint, if you'd be willing to share that.
Oh, sure. It's rather vague. Maybe my outline might even be better than the PowerPoint itself.
Yeah, I think partially it's that there are links in the PowerPoint that one can't link to through.
Oh,
Zoom.
right. Yeah, I was going to click on some of the
Send that to me. I can share it with everybody. And then I do have a question from Donna Meyer. What are some good sources for operating grants?
Operating as in what?
No, Donna, I'll invite you to clarify, Donna.
Yeah. I'm not even sure if
Okay.
I have an answer.
Just grant funding to cover daily expenses, staff costs, and it just doesn't seem like there's very many resources out there.
No. Yeah, generally that's an issue. Probably your best bet for that kind of thing would to find a local benefactor or something like that. Most of the grants I've experienced, have dealt with or looked at are really project related. Many of them actually say they will not pay for operating expenses. I don't know why that is. I guess the idea is they're trying to, the grant wants something special and they don't want to fund day-to-day operations. It's harder to show off day-to-day operations, I guess.
That's
Sounds a little cynical.
That's what we're finding too. And you would think in the richest county in the state of Ohio, we would have a few of those benefactors.
Yeah,
We have to go through the weeds to find them.
yeah, because the example I was going to show you the example, but I kind of ran through because I thought I was going to be short on time. For Erie County, Ohio, we have the Mylander Foundation, and he gives grants like that, like for the, I'm with the public library, so like when they will, the children's department might ask for, well, we need toys for this, for our toy room and our story times. We need more hands-on things for infant story time, and they will pay for that kind of thing. But yeah, I guess even they won't pay for, like, I guess the closest you're going to come would be the Ohio History Grant for building. What do I call it again? Where'd my notes go? The brick and mortar is probably the closest you're going to get, and that's basically just for building maintenance from the Ohio History.
Yeah. So I do have a few other things in the chat, and Leslie Wagner is asking if there is an unofficial waiting period for asking for another grant with the same organization.
Yes.
Here, but
I should have mentioned that. It really depends on the organization, the granting organization. But speaking for ORAB, no waiting period at all. As a matter of fact, a previous grant is kind of a plus because it shows that you have the know-how to do things right. At least we thought you did. And if you have a successful grant, you could use that grant to build on another grant. As a matter of fact, there was one organization, and the name escapes me, and I'm not going to mention it anyways. One organization applied for grants 3 consecutive years for ORAB, and we granted them 3 consecutive years because they were doing it right every time, and they were building on the previous grant. So unless the grant organization says we only issue grants every X number of years, don't be afraid of applying more than once. Don't be if you got one grant 1 year, use it to build on the next year's grant. It might work.
Since we have Andy Verhoff here today, I'm going to ask Andy if the same applies to the History Fund, whether or not there's an unofficial waiting period between asking for History Fund grants.
Yeah, you can only have one History Fund grant at a time. So you apply, you get a grant from us and you do the project. You cannot apply for another grant from the Ohio History Fund until you finish the first project, one at a time. And the reason we do that, the Ohio Humanities does that. And honestly, it's not fair. I mean, when you really think about it, if you already have a grant, you need to finish that up before you ask for another one, because it gives other people a chance to apply. So finish the grant you got with us and then apply for another one. And if you finish your first grant in May, I'm making this example up, okay? I'm making this example up. But let's say you finish your first grant in August and it's all done. And What we mean by finished is you have gotten your check or it's in the mail, you know, and call me, I can tell you that. When that final grant is paid off, meaning the check's in the mail or you have the check, then you can apply for another grant. So let's say our deadline September this year, and you finish your project in August, you get your check in August, you're welcome to apply in September. Boom. But only one grant at a time. And Ron, I have to correct you on something. We do not, the History Fund does not give grants for operating costs under its bricks and mortar line.
Yeah.
Renovation projects and rehabilitation projects on buildings on the National Register of Historic Places or buildings that are listed as local landmarks, as you know, if they're a certified local government. But I'm sorry to say this, but you can't apply for a grant from the History Fund to pay your light bill or to pay your staff.
Right, yeah.
Related to project costs. And I'm sorry to report that. And on that, Donna, I don't mean to hog the thing, but I got to mention this. And I wrote it in the comments on the chat. I don't know, like you said, Ron, I don't know of any grants for operating costs. I do not. I've been asked that question a lot. So have you, Ron. I don't know of any grants. Now you're going to get irritated because I'm going to say that like maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, the Institute of Museum and Library Services used to have, they do not have it anymore, but they used to have a general operating support grant, which enabled you to pay your salary and your light bill and your gas bill. But they killed those. And I don't remember why, but.
One source I found, Andy, is that you can apply for 2 successful grants from the Ohio Arts Council after you, and these are project related, of course.
Okay.
After you've had 2 successful grants, you can apply for operating funds.
Oh, okay.
So
I learned
that's
something new today. Thank you,
yeah.
Donna.
Yep. We're
Now, do you have to be an
researching that.
arts organization?
I think they consider education, like what we do, as arts.
Well, I would, go ahead. I'm sorry.
We received a grant from them recently to present a program on American Indians and early settlers to buy costumes, instruments, that type of thing to do this
Right.
program.
Right.
So, and it has to be very project specific. So
Sure.
we need to get a second one and then apply for the operating grants.
Okay, okay. Good to know. Thank you, Donna. I'll mute myself now. I'm done.
Keep going.
I am muted. I'm actually, so I have one more question in the chat, and I'm going to pose it to actually both of you because I've put Andy on the spot totally without warning or anyway. But so the question is, and we'll start with Ron. Do the granting on institutions follow up on the projects to see if they are successful?
Yes, and it really, well, I'm just speaking for my experience, in the sense that they require, most grants will require a final report of your project. Also, in our grants, we, in ORAB, we provide what we call a mentor, but the mentors generally just stand back and make themselves available for questions as the project is going on. But it could be done where we could stop in and check in with them on the project. Mostly though, it is the checkup, the follow-up is going to be in the final report. Usually after the final report, they leave you alone. Unless you ask for more information or more help. But in that sense, go ahead.
Like the ORAB grants, the History Fund requires a final report. We require a mid-project report too, like a check-in, but that's not.
Yes, we do too.
Yep. And then we have a final project report. And that's, you know, that's, we want to know how successful the project was, how everything worked out, you know, what worked out, what didn't work out, you know, maybe you plan to do something and whatever, but we have a final report. Now, we also try to follow up. I haven't been able to claim that we followed up with every grant recipient, you know, years later, but we're trying to get better at following up, like, I don't know, year 2, 3 after the project ends, to like gauge the long-term impact of the project. And that is very unofficial. I mean, there's nothing tied to that other than you picking up the phone or answering the email. So, and what we do with the History Fund is we occasionally write up an article on the local historian, kind of where are they now, if you will. So Worthington, you guys got money for a roof project back in 2014. One that I still point out and will continue to point out to my wife and my child as we drive by the Orange Johnson house. The sun comes up in the east and sets in the west, and I will forever point out that project to them as we drive by it. Anyway, did an article for the local historian a while, I think maybe last year, where we followed up, and we just want to know what the long-term impact of the project was. So
that reminds me, I had forgotten about this. I guess it's probably because it happened in my last year in the honor rep, and I wasn't paying attention as well. But NHPRC, National Historical Publications and Records Commission, grants funds to the state SHRABs, as we call them, State Historical Records Advisory Boards. And each year we have to apply for the grant fund, showing them what we did. And recently, that's one of the one of the requests they made is for us to demonstrate how our grants funds have served the state well. So they advised us that we should start making inquiries with organizations that we've granted funds in the past to see how they are doing, to show that what we granted in 2010 is really doing, well, no, not 2010, we didn't have grants back then, say 2013 is has still provides some effectiveness for the organization. So it seems to be a new thing that's going to be more attention is going to be paid on that by grant organizations. But yes, ORAB, our organization hasn't done it as well as we should have.
I am muted. I am going to go ahead and thank you very much, Ron. We really appreciate it. I think it was a helpful and informative presentation. I am going to stop recording.
Can I just